Up in the sky, what do I see? A UFO is looking at me. Lights flashing all around, bass bumping from the ground. Aliens grooving to the beat, hip-hop rhythms got them on their feet. Strange beings shaped to the flow, spaceships rocking to the show. I see a UFO flying high in the night, moving to the sound, everything's alright. Dancing the stars and neon light, hop to the beat till the morning light. I see a UFO flying high in the night, moving to the sound, everything's alright. Dancing in the stars under neon light, hop to the beat till the morning bright. I see a UFO flying high in the night, moving to the sound, everything's alright. Dancing the stars and neon light, hop to the beat till the morning light. I'm the god, I rise and shine. In this realm I'm divine. Like the world was just a sign. Feel the power, it's all mine. All mine. Thunder claps, the sky obeys. In my hands lightning plays. Mountains bow, the ocean sway. I command night and day. On the God, feel the force. Every star.
Good morning. Good, unbelievable day. I'm having a fantastic day. I hope everybody else is having a fantastic day, fantastic week, whatever, whenever you're listening and chilling. Today's episode is titled Kingdom. And today we're going to talk about the kingdom of heaven, and the kingdoms that exist out there in the world. For, we tend to think of, Michio Kaku is famous for saying, or one of the things he's famous for, I should say, he's famous for a lot of things, but one of the things he always says is I talk to my colleagues, he says, and I tell them about all these beings that may have come here and extraterrestrials and yada, yada, yada. And he says, I get the eye roll factor. And he says, I think it's because you assume that other extraterrestrials who come here are only maybe 100, maybe 200 years more advanced than us, which is plausible. It's plausible that there are. But what if we're talking about extraterrestrials that are 1,000 years more advanced than us, 1,000,000 years more advanced than us, 2,000,000 years more advanced than us? That's what we're talking about today. We're talking about the kingdom of heaven, quote unquote, that exists out there in the cosmos, that has been around for millions of years, way before we even existed. Appreciate you with that follow. Good morning. You know, these, we listen to our world today, and we look and we say, well, our country is a democracy, and we are a democracy because we overthrew the kings that we had. We overthrew anybody who wanted to be, or rebelled against anybody who wanted to be a king. And so, because of all of this, and because of how successful we've been as a country, and as an economy, advancing the world's technology, all these things, we tend to think of our perspective as this is the perfect way. This is the best way to run a government, to run a kingdom, to run the country, to run a planet, to run a society, to do whatever, is a democratic order. Maybe it is on Earth for us humans, but just because it works great for us doesn't mean it works great for everybody. It doesn't even mean that it works great throughout the cosmos. It might be the fact that we exist as a democracy and it works great for us and it works great nowhere else in the universe. For many ancient astronaut theorists, we believe that the idea of kings and a kingdom and human rule that represents the gods all stems from the extraterrestrials originally ruling us and then giving us a little more autonomy and giving our people the idea of kingdoms, meaning they just took them ruling as gods and replaced it with human emissaries, human intermediaries, and made them kings. So the original people followed the gods as their king. And then when the gods decided that it was time for humans to rule and be a kingdom, they gave them the kingship, and they gave them the ability to rule over their own people and their own lives and their own things. Some of this would translate to, you could translate this in the Bible exactly to God gave us free will. Because if the extraterrestrials were the gods, and the gods gave us all these abilities, then the God gave us the ability for these powers, these autonomy, these self judgments and all of that and everything, decision making. All of this was given to us by the gods, or in the case of singular God, our willpower was given to us by the God. We didn't have to worship somebody anymore. We didn't have to bow down and bend down and say to you, you are my God, and here's all these offerings, and my life is yours to do with, and the world exists because you say it does. We didn't have to do any of that anymore. But they thought that the original people needed this same sense of kingdom because it worked for them, and it worked for the entire beginning of human species that they quote unquote say they invented or created or genetically engineered, whatever. The point is that these are the beings that they had their kingdom, and they gave us the idea of kingdom as well. When in reality, it might just be that, they were a king and they said, hey, you people need a sense of government. Well, guess what? This is our government. We're going to give you the same governmental principles. Many theorists have, including myself actually, have theorized that the idea of having a king is actually perfect for ruling over a group of people. A single leader to make decisions is actually perfect because it takes away from the bickering that we see in our own modern Congress. And this, you think this is new? They've been doing this since before the country even existed. You could read George Washington's letters to Congress. They're all about how Congress could make zero decisions, and they had no central leader. Right? It was only until we had the presidency and George Washington as the central leader that we ended up starting to get things done. If it wasn't for George Washington taking the reins, this entire country would not exist at all. And so you have these individuals who could do all these things. But these gods were not stupid. They realized, probably from their own experience in their own kingdoms, remember, we're made off of the gods' image. We would do the same thing that the gods would do. We would do the same thing. They get greedy for gold and shit, so do we. So would we. It would be the same thing. And of course, we would get greedy for gold because they would get greedy for gold. So the idea of worshiping your king as a demigod worked out great because the regular people, would give you offerings, give you everything you needed, so that you needed nothing else but to worry about governing the people. Now, obviously, we know in our times that in its rudimentary form did not pan out, did not work out. Every one of these kings just wanted more and more. They wanted greed, they wanted power, they wanted wealth, they wanted everything for centuries, millennia on this planet. It goes back to ancient Rome, it goes back even before then. Because remember, Rome was a kingdom before it was a republic, not a democracy, a republic, and then it was an empire. But it was a kingdom before. And one of the reasons why people believe that Julius Caesar was going to be this greedy dictator is because a few hundred years before, when Rome had its kingdom, they already knew that these people were greedy beyond repair, did not give a shit about the common folk. Turns out later on that neither did the Republican senators of Rome, but the point is they used that fear to say that Julius Caesar was going to be a dictatorial monarch. It didn't help that he declared himself dictator for life or supreme ruler for life and all of that, but he had these ideas in his brain, and you could see this based on his journal entries and the people around him and historians that from that documents that exist from that time. So the kingdom that exists in our people is not the same kingdom that exists then, but it's very similar to that exists with these gods, but is very similar. We think of, we hear that our Father, if you think of the prayer, and the Lord's Prayer, and you think of our Father who art in heaven. Well, that dates to about 2,000 years ago, plus or minus a few decades. But before then, they said something very similar. Our gods who are in the heavens. If you take many ancient books who talk about the heavens, Sumerians, Hinduism, a whole bunch of different religions, basically they're talking about the heavens as being anything above our own atmosphere, what we call today our atmosphere. Really, in their eyes, it was anything that existed above the clouds. Because the clouds you could see but past the clouds, but when the clouds come in, that's it. It creates like a wall around the planet and you can't see past it. So anything above that in their eyes is the heavens. And so translate that. Back then we thought of polytheistic gods, multiple gods, right? So obviously the heavens would be plural as well in its terminology. Then when we switch to monotheistic and singular gods, we would term it from being a plural heaven to a singular heaven. It's not rocket science. This is studying language and meanings of people. You could learn how to do this by simply paying attention to your English class in high school or middle school. It is not difficult. These people thought one thing back then. They thought of things in a certain way back then. And today we think of them in the same sort of way, but maybe from our own perspective. Because back then they didn't think that there was a single. Today we look and you say, "Oh, you believe in more than one God? Are you crazy?" At least here in the Western world we do. And meanwhile, but back then, it was, "Oh, you believe in only one single God? Are you crazy? There's hundreds of gods out there." But in reality, it's whatever you perceive as being the truth. Now, I want you to imagine for a moment that there's a kingdom out in there on another planet. Pretend it's Earth. Actually, here's a hypothetical story that I'm going to make up right now. 5,000 years from now, the Earth is one species, one government, one kingdom, ruled by a king. And we have all our future technology, our future, space travel, our advanced sciences and mathematics, genetic engineering, gene splicing among people, anything you could think of that would be some sort of futuristic thing that we don't do now, but eventually we'll have the ability of. Now imagine that kingdom says, "All right, we're going to go and travel through space. We got, 6 ships, and we're going to go and send them all out in different directions throughout the universe," right? One of those ships. Now, in our times, in the old days when we had our kings, and I'm taking a little anecdote for reference. When we had our kings in the old times, you would look back and they would say, "Well, as soon as you get out on the open seas in your ship, kingdom rules don't apply. They only apply because we give this guy, this ship captain, governorship. So now he is our representative, of the king's representative on your ship and wherever your ship and the people who belong to that ship go." We would do the same thing. In fact, you're definitely going to do the same thing in space when you're hundreds of millions of light years away from your home planet. You're definitely going to do that. Okay? So you get there and you land on a planet, right? That spaceship lands on a planet, and I am, you know, the governor. Let's say I'm the ship captain, the spaceship captain, and, you know, I have reigning gubernatorial powers because I am the semblance of authority in this group of people. I get to this planet and I say, we have a mission. We need minerals. We need to study life. We got biologists and geneticists and, you know, weather people or whatever, meteorologists. I lost the name of the term for a second. And, you know, we have all these different sciences. Then we have our military personnel for protection. We need the protection because you never know what you're going to find out there in space. There may be another society that we find that's completely warlike and wants to destroy us simply because we exist. So you need a military faction on your ship, and people need to be trained in all sorts of weapons and technology. So you land on this planet and you find that there are beings that live there. And, you know, they're pretty similar to you. They have 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes, a nose and a mouth. And, you know, they have similar reproductive cycles, all these things, whatever. You know, so you decide, well, it's cool. They got life here. It's great for our biologists. And you go and you land and you say, wow, you know, there's this planet we could study. We could study how life has evolved. We could get some geologists out here. And we're going to land and we're going to use our military to create a base around where we land our ship. And you get out and you say, well, geez, you know, I'm on this planet and there's nothing here but my ship, and then the regular people here basically live in huts, so they're not really going to help us with technology and building solid structures. So we need to mine materials, build solid structures, do all these things, and get it done pretty quick. Now, it's 5,000 years in the future, so we have a little bit of robotic technology, different things to make our lives easier, but it's not 100% autonomous, nothing's instantaneous. We're not deities where we could snap our fingers and it exists because I say so. So you get there to this planet and you think, well, we need to start building a wall. And we need to shore up the foundation and start building houses, cutting down trees, mining stone, doing all these things. But you only brought 200 people with you, maybe 1,000 people with you at the most, right? Well, that's very nice, but 1,000 people is not enough to build a wall and a city like Stat. You know, it's not enough. It's enough to do it over a few decades for sure. But to do it within a few weeks or months like you would need it to do in order to survive on this planet, hypothetical planet, every single person would need to be trained in every single aspect of what you're doing, which is exactly what the Romans did. You know, you hear all these and you read all these wonderful accounts of the soldiers of Rome. Think about when Julius Caesar chased the Germans out of Gaul and back across the Rhine River into Germany. Well, these people in modern day Germany, which is really Prussia, and which would used to be Prussia and all those other areas, was Germany into the Roman terms. They pushed them back into Germany over across the Rhine. These natural German people believed that the river was the total barrier. You can't cross it. This river is like a mile across, wide, moving rapid pace. You can't cross it. It's this natural barrier that protects you just like the gods. From the gods gave you this river, right? Well, the Romans said, nah, bro, this river ain't going to stop us. because every one of their soldiers were trained to do everything that anybody needed. Every single soldier was trained as a hunter, an engineer, a warrior, a builder, a weapons manufacturer, everything. So when Julius Caesar said, I want to get across that river, well, they just set to work, started chopping down trees, building planks, building piles to drive it into the riverbed, all these things, building floating cranes that they used and then the cranes had a counterweight, and then when the counterweight would go down, it would slam the rod into the bedrock. So you didn't need advanced technology, you just needed to know how to do it. And all these guys would do it. Today, we have something very similar. And in fact, if you watch a lot of military documentaries and all these things, they talk about how that these ideas for our modern Army Corps of Engineers goes all the way back to Julius Caesar and building the bridge across the Rhine River. Because Julius Caesar back 2067 something years ago, they built a bridge in 10 days, right across, no problem. Hundreds of soldiers working. Everybody knew how to be an engineer. You would need the same sort of thing. So, you start building a landing area, all your guys get out, you start building walls, building this, building cities, creating a perfect area for you to live in and your people to live in and exist safely, right? Then you go out and you start sending out emissaries to go across the planet. You got to send out a hunting party because you need food. You got to send out an expeditionary force because you need to find where the mines are so you could start mining raw materials to build whatever. You got to do all these things. So inevitably, something would happen, good or bad, where they would interact and come upon the local people. Remember those local people with 2 arms and 2 legs? And they would go out and they would say, we interacted with these people. They're pretty smart. They asked us for help. And it turns out that let's call me Prometheus, I'm out here, Prometheus, on an expeditionary mission, and we're going out, and I gotta go and find this, these mines. We'll find the mines. Let's say I'm going out to find the mines, right? And I come across these people, and I find in their civilization, I say, hey, they have these things. Where did they get that material that looks like the material I need? So I go and I interact with them. And they tell me all these things, and I say, hey, I could teach you, you show me this place and I'll teach you some things. And I teach them how to start fires, how to build a building, chop down trees properly, and raise a house. I taught them how to carve this stone into a sharpened point so they could use it for hunting or killing or whatever they want to use it for. So right then and there, I'm a person who's an expert in wilderness survival, fires, cheers, Jib, good morning. The fires, weapons manufacturing, engineering technology, all there in one person. If you look back in ancient Greece, for example, and you look back at Prometheus, he knew how to do all of these things. He knew how to do every one of these things. And in fact, that's exactly why he was imprisoned to a rock and made a force for an quote-unquote eagle to eat out his liver every day. Because he gave these people his advanced technologies and knowledge and expertise and things that they weren't supposed to have, or at least not yet. Not from us. Because he knew all these things. He didn't just give the people fire. He gave them fire, weapons craft, multiple different technologies, ideas, things to do all day long. Society, things that make up a society. Because when you give these people something to live for other than any people anywhere in the cosmos, something to live for other than basic food and water, you have changed the playing field. You have you have given those beings the chance to be more than an animal, more than nature dictates them to be. You could argue that the same sort of similar situation happened here on Earth. In fact, that's exactly what the Anunnaki texts state happened. These state that these beings on this planet, Nibiru, which existed inside our own solar system, existed and came here because they needed raw materials, expand their operation. Their planet is getting overpopulated and they needed to colonize other worlds. They had multiple different issues going on. It wasn't just one thing. It wasn't just that they needed gold to repair their atmosphere. It wasn't just that they were overpopulating their planet. It wasn't just that they had warring factions and all these things. It was that they needed to go out and expand their society. They needed to do all these above things. Don't give the monkeys forbidden knowledge, says Jim. Yo, oh my God, you can't give it to them. But these kingdoms, let's go back to our scenario for a minute. Now let's imagine that I have been on this planet. We'll say I've been here for, we'll say 1,000 years, okay? I've been here on this planet for 1,000 years. And finally, another ship arrives from the home planet. And this guy says, well, guess what? I was also given gubernatorialship. And I also outrank you in our military, so I'm taking over, I'm the ruler, and your rule of law no longer matters. We're going to do what I want to do and what these kingdoms want and what the kingdom wants to do. Well, you say, okay, but hold on, bro. I've been on this planet for 1,000 years. I've settled disputes. I've created genetic abnormalities. I've compiled all this data. I've built a civilization here for us to live on. We've toiled in the mines. We did all these things. You can't just come here and take over because you want to do it. You've never even been here. You know nothing about this planet, nothing about its people, all these things. And he says, well, what's to know about these people? They're indigenous people who are less advanced than we are. Who gives a shit? He says. Well, then the guy says, well, I've been here for 1,000 years and I give a shit. And all of us here give a shit, and the ones who followed us and died along the way, who sacrificed themselves for us, give a shit. So you have a rebellion now. The guys who've been here for 1,000 years versus the guys who just got here. Well, sounds pretty much exactly like the Greek description of the Titanomachy. The old gods versus the new gods. The old gods arrived in heaven. We're here from the heavens. We're here for thousands of years. The titans, the giants, the magnificent beings. They gave us all this thing, but there was less order. There was less structure to the world, to the society, to the planet, to the people. There was chaos. And then the new gods came in and they said, we're going to wipe you out, we're going to fight you, and then we're going to take over. And what happened? And then we're going to expel you, right? This is exactly what's written down in the Greek Titanomachy. The gods, the losing faction lost and were expelled from the world. What does that mean? They were put back on their ship and said, get the fuck out of here. That's exactly what that means. Nothing else. So, so then these gods come in and they say, hey, we're the rulers now. And you remember those old gods you worshipped and all those guys? Well, you're going to continue your worship, but give it to us. And this new ship captain comes in and says, I like not having to do much. I like enslaving these people to build our buildings. I like having them offer me food and wine. I like lounging here in my nice castle on top of Mount Olympus. It's awesome. And you want to come up here and that's just what we need from you people. The rest of it is all done by robots that we have, and I just need to sit here in this nice comfy chair and not do shit. And and that's exactly what they said. That's exactly what the books did, obviously in less modern terms and in less straightforward words, but that's basically what all these books say. The gods came here, saw the planet, started doing a few things, and then there were multiple different factions that fought and rebelled. Well, that's great and all. But what all you people forget is that the War of the Titanomachy wasn't that one war. In fact, it happened multiple times. You ever wonder why Zeus doesn't exist on this planet anymore? Why he's not here ruling over us as a god? Like he was in the past 50,000 years ago? Because the original faction came back. And then he lost. The new gods had gotten so complacent in their luxury, and this is exactly what the books say. The new gods had gotten so complacent in their luxury and in their life that they started to neglect everything except being worshipped, and when the old faction came back to reestablish power and order on behalf of the kingdom, they were wiped out pretty quick. Because they had nothing left. They didn't shore up their defenses. They didn't build a society. They didn't do all these things like the original kingdom representatives did. They came here and they basically enslaved the population, but instead of using chains, they used your mind into thinking that you're worshiping them. And then they used their advanced technology to say, look, I could just launch a lightning bolt from the sky, and then the ship that's up there in the sky just shoots down like a plasma beam or something, and it hits the ground, and there's the lightning coming down, or whatever, and it makes all this thunder and rumbling noise because the ship makes all this thunder and rumbling noise, and then physics takes into effect, and when you shoot that plasma beam, it literally has to break through sound and break through the atmosphere, which creates all this thundering ripple effect, and it makes sound. So if I were being a spaceship up in the upper atmosphere and I launched a bolt of plasma particles, some sort of electronic particle that resembled lightning, and I launched it down, it would make all this noise because it interacts with the physics of the universe. It's just like if you were to teleport, right? And I remember my physics professors talking about this all the time. This is the example he used. If you were to teleport from here to there, when I appear, it would make this big booming noise. And it's because there was nothing there in that space. There was just air, space, atmosphere, tiny molecular particles, but no object, then suddenly there was an object in that space. Well, the air that was already there, all those tiny molecules, would need to be pushed out of the way in order for me to now inhabit that space. And that pushing effect is what creates the boom. Similarly, if I were to teleport away from this spot, as soon as I leave this spot, you would hear some sort of like sucking vacuuming effect because the air rushes into that spot, that it wants to inhabit the spot of where I am. Very similar to water properties, where if I were to pour water from a smaller container into a larger container, it would spread out and even out because it wants to inhabit the whole area. Very similar situations. So I forget why I brought up this example. Because of the lightning bolt. So if I were to do something like that and I were to strike it down, you would say, this guy is some sort of deity. He commands the lightning. He commands the skies. All these things. But in reality, it's technology. And we have some of these technologies today. If you look at Nikola Tesla, who his biggest thing he invented was right before he died was the death ray. The death ray was basically a plasma beam. He figured out a way that you could launch plasma in solid particles in like a beam ray thing that you could, launch it out, hit an object, and, it would blow up, interact with the electronic particles and all those things. And it was a weapon. And Tesla actually wanted to give these weapons to every country and government on the planet, because he thought that if everybody had these weapons, then it would be a deterrent for all-out world war. Remember, World War I had just ended, and he was sitting there watching World War II start and go on before he died. And he made this proposal for the death ray technology. But many ancient astronaut theorists and modern historians think that it was just easier for us at the time to create the nuclear bomb than it would have been to create the death ray technology. Maybe. Interestingly enough, there are examples of our modern military working on death ray technology. Not that it's in effect or in force, but testing it. Laboratories, maybe in open world, whatever, it's in the process of being built. So maybe he was right on the technology, but that he was wrong in, the time frame of when it could be built. What's interesting, too, is that Tesla's thought frame on if every country had these weapons, nobody would want to attack each other, is the same thing that we thought of throughout the entire Cold War with nuclear technology. We thought the same exact thing, that if everybody had nukes, nobody would want to use them against each other. Well, guess what, bro? That ain't true at all. Okay? We know now from experience that not everybody needs to have nukes. In fact, almost nobody should have them, but that being said, we have them. And nobody should have these nukes, but only if the ones who already have it and can be trusted with it, meaning haven't used it yet against us, can keep them. Nobody else can have them. And the reason is because we know that they would use them. There's no reason to think that if you have it, you would not use it. That is stupid. Imagine buying a brand new phone and then leaving it in a drawer in the box, never opened for the next 50 years. I mean, you just spent like $1,600 on that new iPhone, and that was wasted. So you think the government or any government in anywhere in the entire cosmos is going to spend that type of money on that and not use it? It's ridiculous. Of course they're going to use it. It's the same thing that happened on later on. This is why we don't want Iran today to have it, because they would use it. Their entire country supports terrorism throughout the entire world because you don't believe in Islam. And then even if you believe in Islam, if you don't believe in the same faction of Islam as them, you're just as bad as anybody else. So, of course they would use it. Of course the world would use it. It's ridiculous to think that we wouldn't. So we don't need any of that anymore. All of that is over. And of course, these extraterrestrials would do the same exact thing. Of course they would use the weapons and the technology. If you look into the Bible or other books, Sumerian tablets, things like that, the story of Gilgamesh, extraterrestrials did use this technology. They did come here. Look at the story of the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. The God said, you didn't listen to our rule of war and what we say exactly, so bye-bye, see you later, wiping you out. Go to Mohenjo-Daro. They're testing the site today, and for the past 20 years has been constantly coming up with the same data that the buildings there were destroyed by nuclear weapons grade technology. There's radiation that exists all over the place. They could still measure it, and they've consistently been measuring it for decades now. So, of course they would use it. Of course the gods would use it. Of course we've been using it. You know, it kind of gets on my nerves a little bit that we have all this evidence out here, and yet you all still want to believe in Christianity and Jesus. You know, the kingdom of heaven is just the kingdom of the heavens. The kingdom of heaven is really the extraterrestrial gods and their military faction who come here. If you read the Bible and the Torah, a lot of them talk about in the coming end of days and the New Jerusalem as being a fully formed city descending upon the earth. Well, maybe it is. But maybe that city is just a giant spaceship. Or maybe the spaceship comes here and they have the ability to 3D print the city exactly the way they wanted, and then they got a bunch of lifts and landed it down on the planet. And therefore the New Jerusalem just landed. You know, I mean, you have to expand your mind a little bit. And if you look at all these stories, I mean, look at one of my favorite quotes to talk about is the story of Job in the Bible. Now, Job is a very humble but also wealthy, pious, faithful, religious man. Commits, you know, sometimes daily and or weekly sacrifices to God, does all these things that a good believer in God would do, a good follower would do. And yet differently, they're up there and you look at the same person from the perspective of the gods in the story, and the gods are sitting there having a conversation. And he says, you know, all of them. God is sitting there, or the head god is sitting there with their ship captain, with all the other counselors, and who consists of Michael the archangel and Lucifer the devil, and all of them are sitting there and they're talking. and they're deciding about rules and things that they want to do. And he says, yeah, all these people are awesome. You know, all the people love me. They love worshiping me. I'm the best God that they've ever had, blah, blah, blah. And Lucifer says, well, how do you know? Because I walked this planet for centuries, and I've seen all sorts of terrible things and debauchery and all of that. And he pulls up a vision. Let's call it a hologram in our modern technology. And he shows God and he says, look, God, this is your buddy Job. You love Job. Job gives you the best sacrifices, right? Well, but Job is rich. He's wealthy. He's got a lot of kids. He's got a big family. He's lived a long life. Of course he's going to worship you. You've done nothing but good things for him. Why don't you take all that away? And then, of course, you know, he does. He takes it all away. And in the end, Job is still, you know, pious, still faithful in the God. And so Lucifer says, okay, I was wrong. There were a whole bunch of people here. And they really do love you, and you really are great to them. But hold up a second. Because just before that in the Bible, we learned that Lucifer is the enemy of God. He's the antithesis of God. He's everything God is not. While God is good and great and light, Lucifer is dark and evil and demonic and terrible and bad. And yet, they're sitting there chatting with each other, having a conversation. For all we know, they could be smoking cigars and sipping some drink. You don't know. Of course they could be doing that. They could be doing any of things, any of the above. Because they're worshipped. They're gods. What I think is that the Bible is a mixture of stories that go back thousands of years. And their time frame is mixed up. For if you were to say that Lucifer did rebel against the God, you would then say that Lucifer was originally, you look at the Bible, Lucifer was originally one of the founding gods. And then he was the first one created by the God. If you look at that as a military structure, you have God as being the commander. You have Lucifer as being his first in charge, his general. Then you have, well, guess what? A bunch of guys agree with the general and don't agree with the commander. So they side with the general and rebel. And they have all these wars and all these things in the kingdom. And now there's a rebellion, a titanomachy. A faction rebels and they become the leaders. All these beings do the same thing. And then guess what? They all have to pick their own, who's going to rule over what. They're going to have to pick who's going to rule over what area of the earth. And if you look at the stories of how did they decide who's going to get areas, they basically drew straws. And Hades ended up with the area of the dead, the devil, the underworld, the whatever, you know. But all these beings, they were trained. They were all trained to be able to do multiple things, to be able to rule as a governor, be a regular military soldier, build bridges like an engineer, you know, farm the land like a farmer. You know, I mean, they could do all these things. So when it came time to pick who was going to rule over which area and what, everybody was equally qualified. Everybody was equally qualified, and they said, hey, so we're all equally qualified, we all have the things, so let's draw straws. Let's draw sticks. And all of a sudden, each person gets their area to rule over and what they have and what they do. And they all have the ability to do all of the things. Now, we would think of our gods as being able to do everything. It makes perfect, total sense that all these gods would know how to do this stuff. And then, because they know how to do all these things, multiple different specializations and skills, we would honestly understand them as being gods. Because in your mind, God is all-knowing, all-omnipotent, all-understanding, knows everything and knows how to do everything. And that's exactly what these beings could do. So of course you know that you would call them a god. But it's the same thing as if I were to have a military scientist who was a Marine and went through boot camp and did 3 tours in Iraq and then, got his degree in physics and is now doing this and is now an astronaut and is going to this planet or whatever. And guess what? They know how to repair the spaceship just like a mechanical engineer does. And they know how to combine the chemicals so that they can breathe just like a chemist and all these other things. So they have multiple degrees of specialization, which means that they know multiple things. So, it's a wonderful thing to be able to look at the world and do whatever you need to do. This is true because you think about the first American colonists, and even the ones who expanded out west and did all these things. The leaders of the group, those people, they knew how to do everything. You go out there and they're like, all right, well, we need furs. And so they know how to hunt, skin, and tan and leather the furs. They know how to chop up an animal and use it. Could you go out there today and how many people could go out there today as one single person or a group of 5 people at the most, and each one of you knows how to build a wall, skin an animal, use the fur to make a coat, sew it all together, use the parts of the animal for food, use the bones to, make weapon handles or whatever, jewelry, all these things. How many people know how to do that today? Not me. I don't know how to do all that shit. I could definitely build a wall, could probably build a fence, could do a lot of things, but I could hunt and shoot the animal, skin it into meat, probably not as good as it could be, probably be a lot of fur left over. Could I chop it up and defat the animal? Probably not either. I'm pretty good. I could cook it up pretty well and it'll be the fucking best thing you've ever eaten. But skinning it and doing all of that, I couldn't do that. Maybe if I learned how to, of course I could, but who am I going to go learn that from? Am I going to get like a apprenticeship as a tanner? Do they even have those anymore? Is the point. The point is all that shit is, it's like, but all these people knew how to do that. The gods, when they arrived on the planet, knew how to do that. And so the kingdom here, I realize we're already 1 hour through. So we're going to continue on about the kingdom. So the extraterrestrial kingdom that existed, or maybe even still exists, in the beginning I talked about how they had their how they had their kingdom existing in our own solar system, in our own planet. I mean, in our own solar system that cross paths with our planet. The Anunnaki said that this planet was named Nibiru. They called it this name, whatever. And I don't know what it meant in their language, but I remember what it means in their language. That's right. Hold on, I'll get to it. The kingdom existed as a group of individuals who ruled over it for generations through their bloodlines. The planet existed in our own solar system and has an extremely elliptical orbit that does not follow the same crossing path as our planet, as the 9 planets that we do have today. In fact, these 9 planets, we have 9 planets and 3 dwarf planets. 2 reasons why they're dwarf planets is their shape and their revolution around the planet is not entirely in the same elliptical situation as the other 9 planets. That's why Pluto's not a planet, and that's why other dwarf planets are not a planet. Pluto switches spaces with Neptune a lot of times. I forget how often it is, but there is a measurement for it. You could look it up. And, well, so we know that planetary bodies can cross into each other's orbits and still maintain their own orbit. Now, it's said that Nibiru is in our solar system, but its orbit is extremely elliptical and takes about 3,600 years-ish to make one revolution around our sun. Well, if it takes 365 days for our planet to make one revolution around the sun, and one revolution equals 1 year, then 1 year for a being who's living on Nibiru is 3,600 Earth years. Which means that before we see Nibiru again, 3,600 revolutions around our star will have taken place. Now, when I was a kid, and even before then, we always talked about and heard about Planet X. This was before Pluto was a dwarf planet and no longer a planet. This was before all of that. But the same way the reason we discovered Pluto originally is because we noticed that there was in fact, this is how we also discovered Neptune, but we noticed that there was gravity pulling on Neptune, right? There was another object pulling and pushing against Neptune, which made it wobble slightly in its orbit. It didn't happen all the time, but it happened when they got close enough. And that's how we discovered Pluto and Neptune. Eventually, we kept looking for where it was and where the gravity was being pulled from, and boom, there's Pluto. That's how Pluto was discovered. Now, you look, and so decades ago, they were saying, hey, Pluto was being pulled on by another object also. But we can't see this planet yet. It's not within our thing. It's too far away. It's at a weird spot, but it would be the 10th planet. So we'll take the Roman numeral for 10, which is X, and we're going to call it Planet X. Now, since Pluto is no longer a planet, they've changed that Planet X to now be called Planet 9. Still the same thing. It's the same anomaly we're talking about. However, you'll remember a couple of years ago, I think it was 2022 or 21, astronomers announced that they may have discovered that the orbit for this Planet X, now called Planet 9, is a, 3,600-ish year ultra-elliptical orbit. Spreads out over in a weird area, does not follow the same pattern. You know, if we were to rotate like this, you can't see it over here. If we were to rotate like this, the other planet rotates like, you know, like this, like, you know, in a total on an angle, do all these things. That's exactly what they say Nibiru does in these ancient texts. They say it has a 3,600-year ultra-elliptical orbit that is tilted at a crazy angle. They even say that it might cross into another solar system. I don't think so. Based on our own evidence and based on our own, you know, positioning that we know of today, probably does not cross into another solar system. But that's what they say. And so this this planet would go and cross over through our solar system, and in its revolution around our sun, after a few, you know, as it gets closer into the main part of our solar system, it goes through and starts to cross across the orbits of the other planets. Not all the planets, but it fairly often comes pretty close to Earth. Now, obviously, this has not happened in the past few hundred years, because we would know something about this. I mean, if there's an object way bigger than the moon in our atmosphere, you know, close to us, that's a problem. We're going to see tidal changes and climate change and warbling of our planet, mass freezing and melting of the polar ice caps. I mean, it would be devastatingly cataclysmic on our planet. So we obviously have not seen that planet come across for us. But in the days of the Sumerians and the Anunnaki, this planet, Nibiru, was called, and in their terms, Nibiru meant the planet of the crossing. Now, what's interesting is that the same symbol we use for modern day Christianity of the cross was the original symbol for the planet Nibiru, the cross. And the reason why it was the cross was because they called it the planet of the crossing. So the symbol of the crucifix today may be because of where, you know, our history and Jesus and all those things is why we use it today. But its original symbol dates back to Sumerian and probably even before then times of Nibiru as being the planet of the crossing. So when this planet would cross into our, you know, main part of our solar system, and it would start crossing across planetary orbits, it would, you know, it just, the name stuck. It was the planet of the crossing. And, you know, but in our modern Christian terms, we use it to represent Jesus and his struggle on the cross and all of that. But I'll tell you exactly what it is. You know, we today like to think of our time as being the most advanced, and pretty much anybody before the past 150 years were cave dwellers. That's how regular human beings imagine it in their mind. Very extreme like that. Because we think that, you know, the things that we've done makes us better and separates us from nature and animals and whatever. But while it's mostly true, it doesn't, it pushes away the accomplishments of the people in the ancient times and the meaning and how they felt and how they did things. You know, At the time of Jesus, there had already been like 4 Roman emperors after Julius Caesar. Way before Julius Caesar even existed, way before Rome existed, crucifixion was a real thing. And it was a very common and real punishment that governments would inflict on people. There's this wonderful documentary on crucifixion. It's like 2 hours. It's very long. But it goes through all the different examples and types of crucifixion and how torturous it is and all these things that existed. We know that crucifixion actually originated in Persia back then. And what they would do is it was literally just like a sharpened tree trunk. And they would literally have a bunch of guys hold you up down and bend you over while another guy or maybe 2 guys held this big tree trunk as like a stake and rammed you right in the ass with it. And then they would stick it up and you would slide down it. That was crucifixion for them. That was what they did. And then it evolved over times into multiple different forms of punishment to where you get to the common Roman version of it, of creating a T-shaped structure and then having the person be on it. We know that, for example, it was thought that, if you look at like depictions of a crucifix and look at Jesus on it, you see that his feet are across from each other like this, and the nail goes right through the center of the foot. We know today from archaeological evidence, historical records, and studying that that's not how they nailed somebody to the cross. A lot of times they would instill a platform underneath the feet, and they would and so that you would stand on it, and then they would nail your ankles and your heel bone into the side of the wood. And this is terrible and terrifying. I don't want this to happen to me. And they were doing this for hundreds and thousands of years before Jesus existed. They had this idea, so in reality, Jesus was nailed in the heel bone, and also it wasn't in the center of the palm, it was in the wrist bone over here. So we know that that's how they did it. And also, not everybody was nailed. A lot of people were tied up by ropes. And it was only later, like 100 years before Jesus and after, that they realized that nails were actually better and more torturous and all these things and more efficient. It was easier to have the nails than to have the rope. So that's what they changed to. But there's this amazing story in the Bible, right, of young child Jesus. Now, we all know the story of Jesus and being in Mary's womb, and, Joseph is hauling the donkey all the way to Bethlehem because he's got to register for the Roman census, right? We know that that was the case. The thing is that most people forget about the story or don't even read the story about when Jesus had to go do the census about 10 years later. Remember, the reason we have a census is because the Romans had a census. We do it because it worked great for collecting taxes, understanding your economy and your people and your society, and it worked great for the Romans, and so we do it today too. So they and Israel and the Jews were all Roman citizens at the time. So when Jesus was in the womb. His parents had to travel to Bethlehem for the Roman census. And there's the story of them traveling back. And then a few decades later, they got to travel back to Bethlehem for the census again, because that's where his father was from. Well, this time there was some sort of Roman thing that happened. And on his way back, Jesus and his family are walking down the road, and all they see about every 20 feet along the road are people lined up in crosses, thousands of them that were just executed, nailed to a cross, and staked up for until they rotted away through the course of nature. Nobody was going to take their body down. Nobody was going to take down the cross unless nature intervened. Nothing was going to change it. And Jesus and his family back then, the only roads that existed were the Roman roads. So these roads, they had to follow it. Otherwise, you were going off into the woods, off into the desert, off into the whatever. And so you had to follow this road. You had no choice but to follow this road and stare up at the thousands of people who were crucified to this cross. Well, if I was an 8 or 10-year-old and I saw that, that would change my entire life. That would change the way I thought about the world, the way I thought about my local government, the way everything. And we know that the Romans ruled by torture. They ruled by fear. Even before it was an empire, they did that. And then if you look at in the AD times, when Rome was starting to decline and Christianity was starting to take hold, if you look at it, at the records of it, it's because Christianity took forth and became the driving force that eventually led to the overthrow of their government, because people were no longer afraid to be tortured to death. That's how the Romans ruled. You either paid up, or we're going to torture you and your loved ones to death. They did that for hundreds of years, and it worked great until it didn't. So Jesus would see this, and there is no doubt that he would go and see this torture and this terribleness and decide that he wanted to become a man of peace, love, and faith. The exact opposite of hatred, torture, and murder. So if obviously he would do all these things. Now, where that led him in life is a matter of many speculations. We've talked about it before, and we will talk about it again. But the point is looking at something so traumatic as that would change our lives and would change history. Seeing that cross and all those people dead on the cross would obviously mean later that you would know that if you were to rebel against these people, that they would inflict the same punishment on you. Because if it's worked for hundreds of years, why would you stop now? We wouldn't do that. The ancient gods didn't do that. Just because, in fact, that's what they say. Everything worked for hundreds of years. Why stop now? Why change it now? Why do this and why do that? They get stuck. They get complacent in their ideas and in their world and in their kingdom. And they love the sense of rule and order and everything that they have going on in the moment. They don't want change. The Romans didn't want change. We modern humans don't want change. Nobody likes change. And scientists have a name for it. Homeostasis. Everything is in perfect order. And so you have you have this symbol that was an ancient symbol originally for meant to symbolize the planet Nibiru, and hey, we have this person who we raise up to be like a god. We deified them because of their self-sacrifice and their hard work and their ethic and their this and that, just like the Romans used to do. It was the same thing, and they would raise them up and they say, we need a symbol for this person. Hey, they were nailed up and tortured on a crucifix, which is in the shape of a cross. And this old symbol that nobody has used for 2,000, 3,000 years, we're going to use this symbol now. And it's going to be our symbol. So today, that's why the symbol of the crucifix represents Jesus and not the planet Nibiru. Many ancient astronaut theorists, however, would argue that it might represent one and the same. It might represent the same thing as, you know, if you were to interact with, let's say that the God who was Jesus' father or whatever was really the extraterrestrial king, and he made decisions and said, no, 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 instead of having from our DNA database, you're going to give this kid, this human being, and you're going to splice their genes with my DNA. And because of that, he's going to get whatever else, and then I'm going to give him whatever other advancements and upgrades that I want to give him. Because we have the technology. And if you listen to what the many but few words Jesus always said was his Father's kingdom, the kingdom of heaven, or when asked by Pontius Pilate if Jesus had any plans on being a king or whatever, he said, my kingdom is not of this world. Now, modern historians rightfully take that as to meaning, dude, I am not a threat to you. I'm not going to rebel against your government. I'm not doing any of that. Which is true. He was saying that. His idea was not to, start up a governmental revolution, even though it's basically what what ended up happening. And, but my idea is just to change the minds of the people. Our people, the Jewish people, and not your Roman citizens. And there's stories that say Pontius Pilate believed him and said, this guy does not seem like a threat to me. So you would look and you would say, well, this person, is very different, and he's doesn't want it, and who cares if he believes that his heaven and his kingdom is in the afterlife? Who gives a shit? Let that idiot believe that he'll be a king when he's dead, or whatever the Romans would have said. They definitely would have said that because they thought just like that. They thought you were an idiot if you weren't a Roman. And even then, if you weren't a wealthy Roman, you were an idiot. So, so the ancient gods who came here, their kingdom worked out great. You had, I gotta take a sip of water. I've been talking this whole time with no water. Unbelievable. Chat, you take a sip of water too. And the kingdom, the supreme god or king, was named Anu. Anu had his two sons, Enki and Enlil, both of different wives. And they would fight amongst each other, fight amongst their god. But Anu sent his two sons out into space. In fact, what he really did was, you hear about, if you read the Sumerian texts, the first ones to land here on this planet was Enki and his envoy, his entourage. The firstborn son, but not the heir. Why is this? Well, you're gonna need, if you're a kingdom, you're going to establish a new colony world, you basically need somebody you could trust to rule as the king in your stead. So that's going to obviously be the same thing that kings do today and in our whole human history. It's going to obviously be the person you trust the most, which is probably your son or daughter or whoever your child is, family member, something. You're going to trust that family member more than you're going to trust anybody else. So he sends out his son. And they come here and they rule over whatever. Enlil trains as the prince to rule the planet. And then he says, all right, son, to Enlil, now you're going to go and join your brother over there at the other planet. And you're going to take over the rule there. And this is going to be your test to how you rule the planet. And how you're going to rule our planet. And so they go through all these things, and Enlil arrives and takes over Enki's command, takes over all these things. Not happily, by the way. All these stories in Sumerian and Greek texts are very similar, of the gods fighting amongst each other for power, for wealth, for whatever. And all these stories, they're so similar, it's crazy. And they basically talk about how the gods came here, and when the other faction, the gods came here, they fought each other, and, through open conflict, through, verbal conflict, whatever they did. They did all these different things in order to compete with each other. Just like any other kingdom or human species would, or anything. And they wanted to establish their own rule of law. Well, eventually, they keep fighting and fighting and fighting. Then what happens is see, we think of our one single omnipotent God as being eternal. Lives forever, has been there since the beginning, will be there long after the end. All of the above. But the ancient gods were not eternal. They were immortal as being not constrained to the time frame of human beings, meaning they weren't subjected to the natural processes of the earth, meaning their aging and meaning, bodily processes, metabolic processes, all those things. All of those didn't happen for them, or at least not in the same time frame as ours, which we established in the beginning it wouldn't be, because they had a 3,600 Earth years equals 1 year on their planet. So, if you could imagine, let's say Enlil lived to be 100. That's 36,000 Earth years he lived. Well, so he dies eventually in the Sumerian texts. And of course, the heir has to take over. He's got to be the king now. He's no longer the prince, he's the king. So Enlil gets called back. Well, Enki says, I've been fighting you for the past 500 years. And I'm not going to listen to you on the home planet. I'm not going to listen to you and what you say. I don't care if you're the king. I'm the king here of this planet. We're done. we're gone. You could take your whatever force and get out of here. So Enlil was called back to the home planet, and he sends out military envoys. He sends out military ships, and they fight this big battle. And guess who wins the battle? Enki. He has the right now to rebel and create his own colony world and be the king of that world. Zeus. Because if you look at, the old order was Anu and his son Enlil, and the new order of gods is Enki and his followers, and his sons and children and all of the above. And we look and we see, oh, these gods are going to, take over the world, and we're going to rebel against them because we don't want to be subjected to their rules. It has caused nothing but fighting and all these things. Well, turns out Enlil really wasn't that great of a king. He put the kingdom in economic peril. He put all these, he spread their military forces too thin. And eventually the Council of Gods exiles Enlil. They exile him. Well, where's Enlil going to go? And then who are they going to have put in charge? Well, they're going to have Enki be in charge. He's next in line for the throne. And he's not of this 100% the same DNA, so maybe he won't be as crazy as Enlil or was. Maybe blah, blah, blah. And so Enki gets called back to the home world to rule as the new king. And Enlil is set off on exile. Then he's eventually captured and imprisoned here on the earth for 1,000 years. And then is sent to rule and walk across the earth for all eternity. Well, that sounds exactly like Lucifer's punishment in the Bible for rebelling against the gods. Lucifer was imprisoned in a cage for 1,000 years on the earth, and then left to walk among the planet, never to be a heavenly angel again, never to do anything except perpetually reincarnate on this planet. Well, if your lifespan is, 100,000 Earth years, you could live for all, that is, from our human perspective, all eternity. Because it's eternity for me, it's all eternity. And so when Enlil would walk among the earth, and he would go and he would say, hey, this is where I'm going to take control. This is where I'm going to be the guy. This is where I'm going to teach you how to do all these things. I'm going to rule over you. And he would do the same thing. He would come in and say, I'm the god, I'm ruling over this planet, this area. And so that doesn't really work. So Enki decides he's got to send out another emissary and military faction. And of course, following in tradition, he can't send somebody he doesn't trust. He's got to send Enki. Enki's got to send just like his father sent Enki, he's got to send his son, so he sends Marduk. Marduk comes down from the world and decides that he's going to follow in his father's rules, going to wipe out, hunt down the enemy, destroy them. But then Marduk, who's successful in his campaign, realizes and he says, wait a second, this isn't working out. Even my own father, it's not working out for. Because Enki can't keep control over the planet. Everybody just bickers and rebels against each other. All they do all day is just, I think this, I think that, blah, 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 and then nothing gets done. So you have the king, and now even the king doesn't have enough power because many people and many rebels are rebelling against them. So Marduk decides, I've had enough of this. And I'm old enough now to inherit the throne. I'm old enough now and experienced enough militarily to be able to, win these battles, command a legion, be the general, and then eventually be the king. I've learned politics from my father. I've learned politics from my family history, my uncle, my grandfather. I can be a good, effective ruler. And so exactly that's what Marduk thinks. And Marduk goes back to the home world and not only overthrows his father, but overthrows all the other gods and establishes his own kingdom. And then Marduk says, well, but we have this whole other world now, this whole colony planet, and we fucked everything up. We can't, you can't keep going on there. Look, there's monsters and giant beings and small beings and extraterrestrials and Nibiru citizens and blah blah blah, and all these beings living and mixed together in this area and not living well together. It's basically a giant mess. And so what are we gonna do? Well, he looks back at the original edict for them going out here to Earth, and they realizes, when we first came here, we had a good plan. We had a good idea. We had, it was honorable, worthy, understanding, smart, all these things. And yet, somewhere along the lines, instead of being about science, it became about being worshipped. And so we obviously we could go back to the original plan, but we can't do everything we used to do. We can't go and free willy-nilly splice DNA with every creature we want. We can't have bird people and goat people and bull people and horse people and bird people and whatever the fuck. Can't have all of this. Snake people. We can't do this anymore. We can't have giants and all this. We can't. It's not only ruining our kingdom and our kingdom's economy and supplies and whatever, but it's ruining our colony world. It's ruining everything. And it's ruining all of our plans. We need to start over. We can't leave our military factions in charge because the same problem's going to happen. They're going to rebel, take over, and try to be worshipped as gods. And we don't want that. I don't want that, says Marduk. So what we're going to do is we're going to overthrow all the gods, wipe out life on the planet, and whatever. Now, Enki says, well, hold on, my son. I created these beings, and I want them to live. I want them to, exist throughout the world and continue on, and I want to see where they go till their natural end. Not till not to the end that you determine for them. And nobody else agrees with them, so Enki comes down and says, hey, I'm your original God, and I'm watching out for you, and I need you to do this so that you can survive. And of course, the factions figure this out, and they put him on trial, and guess what? Enki successfully wins his case. But it doesn't matter because Marduk got rid of all the council. And so he's got to go and say, this is what we're going to do. So he does it in secret. He rebels against them in secret. Saves a few people. Saves a few beings. Now, Zechariah Sitchin thought that, it was that he didn't realize that the extraterrestrials didn't plan on how devastating it would be for them also, because they had grown accustomed to living on this planet, having food, shelter, water, and now they're just stuck in a spaceship. And they don't have food, shelter, and I mean, maybe they got shelter, but they don't have natural food and water and all of that. So obviously, something's going on, So he thought that they realized that they had made a mistake because their whole society had become so dependent on this world's resources and nature. When in reality, they may have thought that they made a mistake because of the level of destruction, that they had to restart everything from the get-go. They didn't realize that it would be so destructive towards every life on the planet that, I guess they figured that they would have some food left, and as soon as it's done raining, they can go and hunt some deer or whatever the fuck. And that wasn't the case, obviously. The whole planet was destroyed. So you have these mix of understandings of the world, but basically they restarted the kingdom all over again. Marduk said, we're going to redo everything. We're going to recreate our original experiment by setting up our gods, and we're going to create other beings, and we're going to create life again on the planet, and we're going to do all these things and start all over, but it's going to be the right way, not the way we were doing it the whole time. And he said that we're doing this for the assurance of the kingdom. Okay. But where's the kingdom today? The only theories about extraterrestrials are just that, theories and speculations based on scientific data or based on religious information or a combination of the above. But the kingdom doesn't exist today, or does it? Because we hear today in our modern terms, for example, if you look at Paul Hellyer when he made that announcement on Russian TV in Canada, he said that there's a federation of these extraterrestrials, and they have rules, and there's 7 or 8 species of extraterrestrials that exist within this faction, within this federation. And, it's interesting because that would explain where the kingdom is today. Because, like I said in the beginning, you assume, and Michio Kaku says that his co-workers assume that these beings, these extraterrestrials, are 1, 2, maybe even 300 years more advanced than us. But what about 1,000, 2,000, 1,000,000 years more advanced than us? Well, the universe is 13-something billion years old. So, what if that those extraterrestrials who were 1,000,000 years more advanced than us humans ran into some extraterrestrials who were a million years more advanced than them. I mean, what level of technology would you have? Would you be able to even fight that? Would you be able to come close to fighting that? Would, technological things, ideas peter off because eventually everything's been invented? So everybody eventually becomes even in their fighting because everybody's got pretty much the same weapons? Who knows? Maybe they fought each other and lost. Maybe this is exactly what's depicted in Hinduism with the Garuda and the Naga. You had these bird-like extraterrestrials, the Anunnaki, versus the Naga, these snake-like extraterrestrials, who knows where they came from, and maybe they're the ones who were a million years more advanced. And they said, look, dude, you can't fight us, and we're taking over now, and our rules are that we don't interact with these colony worlds. And sorry, you have to pull all your people out, and you can't interact with them, you can't take your natural resources, you can't do anything. And they say, well, we need to do this to survive. And they say, well, sorry, we'll help you out, but you have to become part of our government and part of our federation. Send out representatives, emissaries, ambassadors, whatever, all to us, so that we can all be of the same mind and the same unique, and the same culture and the same understanding. And they must have agreed or done something with that because there's some sort of federation going on. It's either that or they eventually, just like Marduk, got fed up with ineffective rulers and council members and congresses and whatever the hell else you want to name your form of government, and just took over, wiped them out until it was done. Maybe they fought each other, and so much that space travel became too expensive, or they ran out of materials, or it became too expensive to colonize this planet because they weren't, having a return on investment or something like that. So we could see clearly today that the kingdom, as it used to be, does not exist. Now, in our modern terms, with Christianity and Jesus and everybody talking about the kingdom of heaven, and all these different religions talking about the kingdom of heaven, it may be that the God that Jesus is referring to may be the original king or the descendants of the original king of the Anunnaki. Because in a lot of Christian terms and texts and all the things, they talk about how the gods, they talk about how God wanted to continue life on this world, wants to bring life and peace and wonderful through his kingdom to the people. And he wanted to do all these things and bring it back and establish the old order. Remember, before there was polytheism, there was a form of monotheism, not the same as what we have today, but there was a form of believing in one being and one supreme deity. These other deities may have been gods with powers, but they weren't the same as the supreme being. So what you could look at is that this modern Western religion is really a revitalization of the old religions, which was a belief, an understanding, and partnership of the old Anunnaki kingdom of heaven. And in the kingdom of heaven, you will see that all these, because the heavens, heaven is really our singular term for the heavens, which today in our modern terms, science and technology, we simply call space. So the kingdom of these gods is just their home planet that exists somewhere out in the cosmos of space. I'd like to thank everybody for joining me today. This has been wonderful, wonderful talk. We'll see you guys next week. I hope you enjoy your day. Have a wonderful week. Remember to like, follow, subscribe on X, podcast, anywhere on your podcasting platform. Check us out on our website. Much love, y'all. Have a wonderful day.